There's a good chance that you've heard about Ötzi the Ice Man. He's world famous because he's Europe's oldest natural human mummy. He was discovered in the Alps on the Austrian-Italian border in 1991 by some hikers, and I'm kind of obsessed with Ötzi. I consider him my celebrity crush a lot of the time, which I think is actually pretty funny. I also don't know what it says about my psychology, but that's another story. Last year in October, I was actually in Bolzano in South Tyrol, where he is in a museum called the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology, and my friend Monique got some very funny footage of me absolutely freaking out over the fact that I was about to meet him. I was having heart palpitations, and it honestly felt like I was going on a first date, and I was just that incredibly excited over it. You just have to see for yourself what I mean.
Where are we going?
You're going to see Ötzi.
What did you just say?
I'm getting heart palpitations.
Why?
Because like I'm going on a first date. Ötzi is about 5,300 years old, so he's pretty old. He's older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, just to put it into historical perspective. And actually this fact absolutely surprised me because it just gives everything a more contextual timeline. And he is classified as being alive during the late Neolithic technically, but more specifically the Chalcolithic period or the Copper Age, at least the early part of it. And this period is often dismissed when learning about the transition from the Stone Age to the ages of metal, such as the more widely discussed Bronze Age, but the Copper Age is also quite an important period in prehistory. There are a lot of things about Ötzi that truly impressed me. One of my favorite things was seeing all of his garments that they found with him, as well as his belongings. He essentially had a complete Copper Age survival kit because he was on the go when they found him, and he wears these incredible goatskin leggings and a sheep hide loincloth. He had an amazing bearskin cap and a coat made of strips of goat and sheep hide that went down almost to his knees. You weren't allowed to take any photos in the museum, but even just seeing all the garments up close and personal was absolutely phenomenal for me. I was completely awestruck. I've been reconstructing Stone Age clothing since last year, maybe a year and a half now. And so naturally, since this is the best example we have of actual material Stone Age clothes, being able to see Ötzi's garments up close and personal was just incredible. One of the things that's really interesting is scientists who found him also examined his stomach contents, which means it would have been the final meal that he ate before his unfortunate demise. Analysis showed he was struck by a flint arrow in his left shoulder, and it severed an important artery, the subclavian artery. Subclavian? I don't know, I'm not a doctor. Meaning he was definitely murdered. And the thing is, scientists don't exactly know how or why, or any of the backstory of what fully happened. I guess this is something that doesn't really translate through historical record very well. But the focus on today's video is I'm going to be reconstructing Ötzi's final meal, the meal based off of the contents that scientists found inside of his stomach. Before I jump into that though, I've been doing a little reading lately, and I'm currently reading the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization by Hungry Minds, and this is an ad for the book, actually. The book is a luxury coffee table book filled with handmade illustrations and mind-expanding ideas, and I personally really love how much of it also relates a lot to the Stone Age because it covers skills and topics that are important knowledge to preserve if a society was meant to be rebuilt. I personally love the pages that describe how to make fire and how to find water, the making of rubber, how to make glue from the bones and sinews of animals, and the process of beekeeping. They also have a beautiful section on how to build simple housing. If you're into unique gifts and have a curious mind or love going down rabbit holes, this one's definitely for you. The longer I stay in the book, the deeper it gets, with hidden Easter eggs that can easily make time fly by. And the book is actually a multi-layered discovery object, and it contains a secret puzzle or quest for readers to discover, which adds an extra layer of intrigue and interactivity. This isn't just reading, it's decoding, connecting, and discovering. In fact, this is one of many times that I've opened up the book and have read it. The book is full of exquisitely drawn illustrations, all created by humans, of course, and it has an incredible paper quality and premium feel. I love the aging effect on the pages, which helps to make it feel even more immersive. It's more than just a history or science book. It's a unique concept that's great for discovering the unknown, and it inspires you to think bigger. For your own copy of the book, follow the link in my description or scan my QR code here on screen, and use my code Birchwood to get 10% off. Thanks so much to Hungry Minds for sponsoring this video. Now let me explain what Ötzi's last meal consisted of and how exactly I'm planning to approach the interpretation. So Ötzi's last meal isn't actually that complicated. I should state that this topic has already been covered by Max Miller from Tasting History a couple of years ago, and I actually haven't seen that video, but I really love Max Miller's work and I think he's absolutely wonderful. This is going to be my own interpretation without any influence from his interpretation, and I'm actually going to watch his video after I release this one to see how our interpretations were different or similar, because I am very curious what he ended up doing for his own version. I suspect that Ötzi was more so traveling with the food, and I think that he would have kept it in more of a preserved state. It's pretty intense killing an animal, skinning it, cooking it properly, etc., and it takes a lot of time in a single day. If Ötzi was on the go and trying to get somewhere or leave somewhere since he was murdered, he would have needed quick, accessible food that would also keep for a while. He also had 2 completed arrows in his quiver, meaning that he probably wasn't really hunting on this journey because that's just not enough arrows to hunt with. In fact, one National Geographic article states that the author Frank Mai-Sachme, I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm sorry, calls Ötzi's last meal a well-prepared doggy bag. And this to me makes a lot of sense because his last meal consisted of ibex, which is a prehistoric type of goat, and they found both the contents of the meat and the rendered fat in his stomach. So I personally suspect that this would have been smoked or dried, kind of like modern day jerky. And he also had red deer meat, and again, I think this would have been smoked or dried. And then there's einkorn wheat, which is one of the oldest varieties of wheat known to humans. And funnily enough, I usually cannot eat wheat, but this is the one kind of wheat that I can eat and not have any problems, which just feels extremely lucky for this specific reconstruction of his final meal. I also really love einkorn. I find it so delicious and very filling as well and extremely nutritious. And also he had traces of a toxic fern called bracken fern. They don't know exactly why he ate this, but some theories is that he had intestinal parasites, so perhaps he was consuming it for medicinal uses. And another theory is that he actually wrapped up his food in the bracken fern. So that's why you find traces of it in his stomach contents, because perhaps it was just the little bit of amount that was there to cover up the food that he was taking with him. So the way I'm approaching my own meal is that I'm going to think about food preservation as much as I possibly can. So I pre-purchased some red deer jerky that I managed to find being sold online, thankfully, but I was going to make some goat jerky myself as I couldn't find it sold anywhere. And I even bought a whole goat, and then I cut the meat into thin slices after freezing it for a short amount of time to firm it up a little bit, just to make it a little easier to process. And I even decided to slice it with a flint blade just, you know, to see if that would be possible in the process. On a plastic cutting board, ironically, for food safety reasons in this case. But then I couldn't dehydrate the meat that day, so I put everything back in the freezer, and my house is currently about 30 degrees inside, and the freezer was slightly ajar, which I hadn't realized. So the meat was sitting in the heat, and now it's too food unsafe, unfortunately, to try and cook the thin strips. So I have to skip the goat jerky. I did end up cooking some of the goat though a few days ago for dinner, and it was the legs and the arms, and it was very delicious. So I think I'm going to use that as my understanding of what it was like. This wasn't the first time that I've eaten goat, but it's been a little while, so it was nice to try it again. So now I'm going to move on to what to do about the einkorn kernels. I really need to think about how I can make them more transportable specifically. So I've decided that I'm going to turn them into a baked good, kind of like you would with a fresh thing of bread, or even a croissant or a pancake or something like that. So this is basically a Stone Age pancake. So I'm going to boil the einkorn grains and then mash them in a pestle and mortar so that they're sort of in a paste. So I'm trying to mash this einkorn into a paste and it is not working. So I'm going to, I think, add some einkorn flour because I think that they would have had the ability to mill flour because, yeah, there's ways to do it. That is very labor intensive, but it is possible. So yeah, I'm going to do that now and see if it helps to thicken it up so that way I can throw it on the pan and get it cooked in some tallow. And then I'll clump them together in my hands like patties and take some tallow to mimic the ibex tallow that Ötzi potentially had available to him. And then I'm going to fry them on a cast iron pan to mimic a hot stone for frying, which is a cooking option that would have been available in the Stone Age. And I know this because I've seen some of my friends fry bacon on a hot stone before. It was really cool. This process will at least turn them into patties, which would be suitable to keep for at least a few days, and it wouldn't require sudden boiling, much like people leave pancakes out when they have made them and they just leave them on the counter, or a loaf of bread or whatever. Ötzi was not found with a clay cooking pot, even though these existed in the late Neolithic. So I feel like him boiling the grains on the go would not really have been something that was possible. So I suspect something like an einkorn pancake would be a lot more feasible. Somehow I got this thing to actually work and it's not sticking to the pan. So we have viable Ötzi pancakes. Einkorn pancakes, can you believe this? I'm very excited. I also actually tried to track down some fiddlehead ferns, but I couldn't find them for sale, and I wanted to try them out since they are the primary type of edible fern to sort of be like an alternative to the toxic bracken fern, which I definitely did not feel like eating and poisoning myself with. But unfortunately, the store I tried to buy them from was sold out of fiddlehead ferns as it's not currently the right season. After all of this, Ötzi's last meal will finally be done, and I can tell you that cooking over a hot stove during a heat wave is honestly not very fun, but alas, I will suffer through so many things all in the name of experimental archaeology. I've got my Ötzi's last meal here. It looks so good, and my einkorn pancakes totally worked. I was eyeballing this recipe that I made up, but it totally worked. And you can see here, I've got this and a little bit of deer jerky. Fortunately, no goat jerky. That would have been great. All right, let's give it a little taste. I'm gonna start with the einkorn pancake. And I had to cook it in butter instead of tallow because my tallow apparently went bad. Whoops, I'm gonna use it for shoes or something. This is super tasty. Wow. There's no salt whatsoever and no sugar, but I think actually if I added some honey to this or something, which I totally could have done because there was honey in the Stone Age, just not found in his stomach contents. But I think if I added some honey, this would be an incredible pastry or pancake or whatever you want to call it. And a little bit of deer jerky. With the einkorn together, it kind of tastes like bacon and eggs or bacon and pancakes. I guess it's like the modern equivalent would be that. So I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 5 arrowhead. 5 out of 5 arrowheads. I used arrowheads this time because obviously that's the way that Ötzi was murdered, which is very sad, but it just felt relevant as well since he's carrying a couple of arrows. So yes, I give this 5 out of 5 arrowheads because it was just a very good meal and it felt like a nice Stone Age meal, and I can kind of imagine him luxuriously indulging on something like this actually, because we tend to think Stone Age food was bland or gross or too simple, but actually sometimes simple is really nice. And I've eaten a lot of Stone Age food actually in my life, and a lot of it is just very delicious. And I think this meal as well just shows you can have quite nice things. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you all in 3 weeks for another video. This one's also going to be related to the Stone Age. It's going to be something a little bit different than the food video, but you will all see. There are some Easter eggs in this video, but you won't know until 3 weeks from now. It'll all make sense soon. All right, thank you so much for watching. See you all then. Bye.